All right, guys, we're going to rock and roll here shortly. City Council meeting tonight. City Hall is looking to purchase a parking lot. Downtown Charlottesville going to pay potentially $1.7 million to do it. And that decision may be made this evening. We'll talk about that today in the program. Folks, the chatter for so long has been there's jobs everywhere and employers cannot fill these jobs with employees. Well, don't look now, but many of those jobs are going away. Mom and pops, small businesses, medium-sized businesses, big businesses, Fortune 500, Fortune 100, they're tightening the ship. They're calling all cars and they're bringing the horses and the ponies into the stable. And they're looking to contract and to minimize overhead, and they're doing that in part by freezing positions or stopping hiring. A lot of folks say inflation is not going to be put in check until you see that unemployment rate get a little bit higher. Well, it's getting higher. You think unemployment needs to get a lot higher? Is yours on before we start the show? Judah Whitcower's voice you hear right here.
Yeah, mic is on. I'm not saying it should. I'm just saying that I think
it has to put inflation in check.
Yeah, I mean, there's no easy out in this.
Right. We'll talk about that on the program today. The University of Virginia has a rare Chinese book collection in its possession. We'll relay that story to you. A grand opening for a new retail store. Dick's has now been rebranded as Public Lands, and the grand opening is this weekend. We'll talk about that in the program. Markets are on fire right now. I'm talking positive, not negative, thank goodness, and green is across the board. We'll chitter-chatter that with Alex Erpy today on the program. A lot to cover on the show. Judah Whitcower is our director and a key contributor to the program. Judah, we can rock and roll when you're ready.
Quiet on the set.
Guys, welcome to the I Love CVille show. I'm Jerry Miller. Thank you kindly for joining us. It's a good Tuesday afternoon here in downtown Charlottesville, historic Charlottesville, Virginia. Thank you kindly for joining us. We have a Charlottesville, Central Virginia, Albemarle County, Commonwealth, country, and worldwide audience on the Tuesday edition of the I Love CVille show, where we cover the best of Charlottesville, Virginia through a local lens and through a national and global lens. A lot to cover on today's program, folks. Yesterday was a federal holiday, Juneteenth federal holiday. And as a result, the city council meeting planned for yesterday is today. And boys and girls, the councilors are chatting today about a potential parking lot purchase in downtown Charlottesville. And there are few things in this municipality, few things in this jurisdiction that rile up the natives and get the natives more feisty and more frenzied, more frenetic than parking. Parking, especially parking in downtown Charlottesville, gets folks hot and heated. And that's happening right now on Twitter. We'll relay the story to you. Rory Stolzenberg, the planning commissioner for the city of Charlottesville, one of the planning commissioners, posted the who, what, when, where, why of a parking lot purchase on his Twitter account. It comes at the tune of $1,650,000. When many in the community say parking is not an issue in downtown Charlottesville. In fact, many in the community say that parking is plentiful, robust, bountiful, and everywhere in downtown Charlottesville. So that topic on today's show. We'll talk job layoffs today. They're happening left and right. 60 days ago, 90 days ago, Judah, what? 30, 45 days ago? Why don't we go to the two shot? Let's welcome Judah Whitcower, and let's let his adoring fans see his mug on screen right now. There's the jack of all trades, Judah Whitcower. I mean, 30, 45 days ago, J-Dubs, we're chattering on this very program that local businesses can't find folks to work. Now the chatter on this program is those jobs that existed 45 days ago, they're evaporating and disappearing. And the commentary by
I
talking
don't know
heads,
that. I don't know that they're the same jobs, but
We'll talk
but
about
I do
that.
know what you're saying.
Yeah, I want to talk about that on the show. Carol Thorpe, welcome to the program. She's the queen of Jack Jewett. She's watching in the Jack Jewett district. My fear, and we'll talk about it on the show, is these job opportunities will evaporate. And the folks that were on the sideline, or as you put it, as you've, I think, very well described on this show, doing more with less money.
Or finding other. I mean, maybe they're selling stuff on Etsy or
Yeah, they've reinvented themselves.
There are ways to make money.
Yeah, they're doing different things besides being in the workforce. Kerry Rock, welcome to the show. He says, J-Dubs, what up, dog? The folks
Good to hear
that
from
were
you,
on
Gary.
the sidelines, I think now are going to be in a very tough spot.
I think they've been in a tough spot, and
It's getting worse.
Nothing is getting easier,
It's going to get worse.
and
It's going to get ugly before it gets better.
it's been ugly. It's just getting worse.
It's going to get worse. Elon Musk now saying a recession is inevitable in a Zoom call yesterday. So we'll talk jobs locally here on the program. We'll talk parking and city council considering a $1.65 million parking lot purchase tonight. We got some Chief Brackney follow-up questions. There was a Reddit thread. Interestingly, I believe Roy Solzenberg, the planning commissioner, also participated in that Reddit thread that you sent my way.
I wouldn't be surprised.
And we have some follow-up questions from the Brackney Reddit thread. At least I certainly do. I know you do as well.
Yeah.
What struck you from the Chief Brackney Reddit thread? I will give background for the viewers and listeners. Brackney now suing for $10 million. She had a press conference last week on the federal courthouse steps. Initially, in November of last year, she demanded $3 million. And she said, pay up and pay up quick because you fired me based on me being a woman, based on me being a black woman, and you did it in backroom wheeling and dealing that wasn't right and fair to me. Last week, she takes that $3 million ask, raises it to $10 million, and threatens audio recordings, secret tapes she has in her possession. This has been the talk of the community, certainly the talk of City Hall, certainly the talk of local government. A Reddit thread that got pretty deep on the topic you and I both read. What struck you from that Reddit thread with follow-up questions you may have?
I mean, not to go into all of it, but I mean, there's just some interesting things about council taking a straw vote in a closed session after the Unitarian Church incident in December 2020, having a majority to remove, and Chip Boyles supporting Brackney, at least vocally, up through the end of August, when she was fired at the beginning of September. I just think there are definitely some interesting aspects of this story, and it would be nice to have all this come out in court. I don't know if the city is going to wait around and let that happen.
What'd you make of the Walker comments in that Reddit thread? The Kyle Walker comments in that Reddit thread?
I definitely. It sounds interesting. I mean, talking about how, rather than a lot of this being a conspiracy or a city council member conspiring behind closed doors, there may have been more of desire to keep this away from Walker just because of her tendency to
Blow things up.
Yeah.
Take them out of proportion.
Anything
Make
she-
them bigger deals.
anything she doesn't agree with. She could have.
Turns into a crisis.
And she could have taken it public, something that wasn't meant to be public, and who knows? I think they're probably wise to keep it away from Walker, especially if they had any.
Inclination that they were working as allies behind the scenes,
Yeah,
which we know they were.
most likely, yeah.
Most likely, yes, they were. There's no doubt that they were. And I want to talk on the Brackney scenario now with the benefit of hindsight, or at least a weekend of contemplation. Guys, if anyone thinks that Chip Boyles, who was an interim city manager at the time, a stopgap city manager at the time, if anyone thinks that a white man who's an interim city manager wants to fire a black woman police chief in the shadows of August 12th, you're just not in touch with the reality. No white man who comes into a jurisdictional gig with an interim label wants to have to fire a black female police chief, 10 months into the job? Not even?
Yeah, and I think the same can be said for for most of the people who are named in the suit. I mean, if you take a look at the people and their pasts and who they are, I mean, accusing them of racism and sexism is, I think, pretty absurd.
Today, City Council, prior to the public portion of the meeting, in closed-door scenario, they're going to discuss litigation matters. That's what's on the docket, the agenda for today's meeting, closed-door session, litigation. They're not clear because there's a lot of lawsuits going on currently with the city, but litigation being discussed prior to today's meeting, closed-door session with the councilors. This is not a scenario that's going to go away. If anything, much like inflation and the global economy, it's going to get worse before it gets better. It's going to get worse before it gets better. The key talking point, and I've highlighted this already from today's meeting, and it's something that Planning Commissioner Stolzenberg tweeted about yesterday, and I want to get your take on this. He sent this tweet yesterday afternoon. Few things get this community hotter than parking. What are the talking points that get this community hot?
Oh, man.
Divisive talking points for this community. Housing affordability gets this community hot. Parking in the city of Charlottesville, in particular downtown Charlottesville, gets this community hot.
Statues
undoubtedly get this community hot. Historical, Confederate, commemorative, war, general type statues get this community hot. What else gets this community hot? School reconfiguration gets this community hot.
Yeah. Well, school gets every community hot.
School gets every community hot. I'll give you that. The historical inequities of this community. Vinegar Hill gets this community hot.
Yeah. The nursing that we're also going to talk about.
We'll bring that up here in a matter of moments. This is Rory's tweet. The city now wants to purchase a 39-space surface parking lot for $1,650,000. That's 73% over assessment, or $42,308 per parking space. The lot is a third of a mile northeast of City Hall. City Council will vote on this in today's agenda. There is no public hearing or second reading for this particular topic. This is being done in the name of economic development, and it's also being done in the name of the parking for the courts. City of Charlottesville, now Albemarle County Courts, or downtown Charlottesville. What do you make of this? It's blowing up on Twitter. The anti-parking people are all over this. The anti-parking folks are often in that, what's the circle? Is it the Venn diagram where there's two circles and there's a piece in the middle?
Yeah.
The anti-parking people are very common with the Michael Payne ideology. Very left-leaning. The anti-parking folks.
What does that have to do with being anti-parking?
The people that are anti-parking, anti-City Hall purchasing this parking, are often the same folks that were pro-Bodo's union, that were Michael Payne's #1 biggest supporters, that were incredibly pro school reconfiguration at all costs, very much in the socialist ideology or camp, the anti-parking folks. I mean, do you think $1,650,000 is a good use of taxpayer dollars to purchase this parking space, this parking lot?
Well-
A 39 space lot?
Well, if I understand correctly, the money comes from, the money's not new spending. The money was set to go to the former parking project.
The
and it's been-
Guadalajara parking lot.
And it's been held back, I don't know, for whatever reason they withheld. So basically, they're using money that they were already going to use for parking. So I don't really have a problem with that, but 73% over assessment, I mean, is that outrageous?
I mean, have you seen what some
Is
of
that-
these properties have been trading for recently? A flat parking lot with zoning opportunity in downtown Charlottesville? Home to a 39 space lot? That's a pretty big lot.
So you're just saying the assessment's gone up?
Yeah. I think the value of dirt just about anywhere has gone up. And assessments haven't caught up to it yet. Scott Aaronworth, Virginia Beach, the Esquire from Virginia Beach, hello and welcome to the show. Grayson giving J.W. Wickower some props on the show. Loving Judah's contributions of late. You're getting some props from Jason, along with Kerry Rock. I mean, $1.6 million for a parking lot to appease the court's agreement and to make sure there's not an issue. In the grand scheme of things, that's not a hell of a lot of money. And eventually, you got to imagine, as we're in this endemic stage, or this endemic mentality or look to COVID, that people are going to come back downtown. And I understand the parking lots have been vacant, Water Street and Market Street. We get that they've been vacant, they're always vacant, they're always empty. But in the scenario that people return to downtown Charlottesville, you got to have the lots to accommodate them.
Yeah, I think...
Am I reading this wrong?
No, I think it's definitely good to be forward-thinking and to try to assess needs that you're going to have in the future rather than waiting until they hit to try to figure out the answer.
You park on Park Street.
I park wherever I can find a spot that's
Do you have trouble finding parking?
Yeah, it's not, I mean, the farther you go, the easier it is.
You
but
go
how
to the
far do you-
24/7, 365 spots and not the 2-hour spots.
Right.
I was just having this conversation with a potential tenant this morning. We have we have 24 executive office spaces in the Macklin building. One of them just became empty, just vacant. They rarely become empty or vacant. Tenant didn't renew their lease on May 31st, so June 1 it became empty. So I'm showing the space to tenants. Tenant says, is parking an issue downtown Charlottesville?
Where do I park?
I said I've never had a problem.
I mean, it's a very dependent question on, what you're willing to do. I mean, do you want to walk 10 or 15 minutes from where you park to where you work?
Well, I mean, I've said this on the show before, and for some reason, some people, I've caught some grief for making this comment. I think it's completely above board of the practice that I do. I park in downtown Charlottesville. I park in the 2-hour parking spaces. Occasionally, because of work, I will run past 2 hours of my time parking downtown.
And you write off the cost of tickets.
And I get a
as
ticket.
Being cheaper than paying for
I get 6
for
to 10
monthly.
parking tickets a year. I pay them. I do what I'm supposed to do. 6 to 10 parking tickets are $120 to $200. They're $20 a pop.
Yeah.
1 month in the parking garage is $1.35. 6 to 10 parking tickets. If I'm 6, I'm below a month. If I'm at 10, I'm still at 200, and I just call it the cost of doing business.
Yeah, well, it's definitely going to be cheaper than paying for
The
parking
$1.35.
year-round.
Yeah, and you park in front of the building. Park in front of the building.
Yeah.
Parking downtown and this myth that it's difficult, that's a farce. That's not realistic. It's not realistic.
It all depends how far you want to walk.
There's open spaces on the Water Street and Market Street garages anytime you want. Open spaces anytime you want.
The problem is starting somewhere and then going and looking for parking.
What does that mean?
That means if you're on this side and you're telling someone, oh, there's always parking over at the parking lot over there.
The Market Street Garage or the Water Street Garage always have vacancies. It's rarely full. Rarely full. People just don't want to pay to park. People think that parking should be free.
Yeah.
And that's a misconception. It's a luxury. And I think if I was more actively involved in downtown Charlottesville, and maybe this is a mission or a message that the nonprofit Friends of Seville needs to get out to the community, Friends of Seville should have an advertising campaign for the community. Come downtown. Parking is plentiful right now. It's everywhere. The DBAC or downtown business leaders should not be reinforcing or should not be creating the stigma or the myth that parking downtown is impossible. It's not good for business. One of the reasons people go to Barracks Road Shopping Center in droves, one of the reasons, not the only reason, is because you can park right there.
Yeah.
It's convenient. Create a campaign and say, the lots are empty. Come downtown and support your merchants, as opposed to bitching and moaning about not having enough parking. The longer parking's in the news cycle, the more negative impact it has on downtown merchants. It is what it is. It is what it is. And eventually, you gotta be careful, because if you start looking at downtown Charlottesville, the mall in particular, you're losing a lot of your retail merchants. It's becoming 6 to 8 blocks of music venues and restaurants. And that's it. And you don't want that. You want it to be diverse and eclectic.
Yeah.
So an important city council meeting tonight, they vote on a $1.65 million parking lot purchase. In closed session, they're talking litigation. You got to imagine that's Chief Brackney's $10 million lawsuit.
Definitely.
Busy time for council.
No
Two
doubt.
other topics before we get to Alex Erpy. What did you make of the UVA rare Chinese book collection? So I'll relay the story to people. A UVA instructor, Soren Edgren.
I believe that it's his collection.
It's his collection. He's an expert in rare Chinese books. He spent decades gathering and collecting what is believed to be the most significant private collection in North America of rare Chinese books. He has taken his private collection, and it now has a new home in UVA's Albert and Shirley Small Collections Library and Rare Book School, where Edgren has been on the faculty since 2014. He just finished teaching a week-long course on grounds for the first time in person since the pandemic. 500 items in this collection.
And
Primarily Chinese.
And he was transporting it back and forth between Princeton and Charlottesville.
Yeah! A rare Chinese...
Every summer.
Every summer.
Yeah.
500 books, rare Chinese collection. Dude is transferring it between Princeton and Charlottesville. Not only rare Chinese books, but ink rubbings, scrolls, wood blocks, calligraphic materials.
I think calligraphic, I don't know.
Calligraphic materials.
Word.
I mean, this dude's going from Princeton to Charlottesville with millions of dollars in rare Chinese books, wood blocks, ink rubbings, and scrolls. I mean, these are like the scrolls that like Moses had.
Kinda.
I mean, you get some Moses scrolls in your Hyundai coming down the eastern seaboard. Don't stop at the rest stop on the Jersey Turnpike, because you don't want those scrolls to get someone breaking into that Jersey Turnpike and stealing them from your Hyundai.
I'm sure that's
Your
what they would,
Sonata.
I'm sure that's what
How
they
do
would
you think
steal.
he transported 500 rare Chinese items from Princeton to Charlottesville? Do you do this in a U-Haul that's hooked up to your Hyundai Sonata? How do you transport these things?
I think you want some climate control.
What's climate controlled? 72-degree air condition in the Hyundai?
I don't know what you need for old Chinese wood blocks and
What
scrolls.
kind of insurance plan do you need to put into play for
man.
some rare Chinese books, some ink rubbings, some wood blocks, and some scrolls? Yeah, what's the insurance coverage plan there? What kind of umbrella policy? Hey, Jake from State Farm, I need some coverage for my scrolls. Does Jake from State Farm have scroll coverage?
I'm sure they do.
This scroll is 600 years old. Will you give me an umbrella policy for that? Philip Dow, welcome to the program. 500 rare Chinese book, scroll, and ink rubbing collection, now home at the University of Virginia. I did not know this, and I'm going to throw this to the very well-rounded and well-versed and super dynamic Alex Erpy. There's a rare book school.
I knew that.
He knew that. I'm not surprised that Alex Erpy knew that. There's a rare book school at the University of Virginia. Did you know that, Jude?
Well, after reading this article, I did.
I found it fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Last piece of news before Alex Erpy joins us in 35 seconds here. Dick's Sporting Goods in 5th Street Station is now Public Lands. It's a weird name.
Yeah, I kind of
The
get
brand
the
is
reasoning.
Public Lands. So Dick's is no more. It's now Public Lands. Public Lands is celebrating its grand opening June 24th through 26th. Public Lands' mission is gear, services, community partnerships, and showing people how to use the outside.
Committed to celebrating and protecting public lands for all. Sounds like
What
a
do you
good.
think of the brand Public Lands?
It's an odd brand.
It's an odd brand.
But considering they're taking over Dick's, I don't think too many people will be surprised to find out that it's still outdoor and active lifestyle gear and apparel. Right?
I mean, no. I just think the...
Also considering the kayaks and whatnot that you've got stacked up out front.
Well, you don't like the kayaks?
No, I'm just saying it's a pretty obvious sign of what it is that they're selling.
Well, yeah. Public Lands, a new outdoor-focused specialty concept, will focus on helping more people get outside to explore and protect America's public lands. Public Lands is also distancing itself from firearm sales, as many in America are drawing a line in the sand for brands and firearm sales.
Did Dick's already do that?
It was their outside brand, their sister company,
Oh, okay.
Field and Stream, that sold it.
They got rid of it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I do want to clarify this. Public Lands is the replacement for Field and Stream. Dick's will still be the sporting goods store. Public Lands replacing Field and Stream for the outdoor version of the company.
So,
Still owned by Dick's.
So
Yes,
public-
so that's
Public
Alex in the
Lands-
green room. Why don't we get you on the
Public
show?
Lands is owned by Dick's?
Public Lands is owned by Dick's. So
Okay.
Public Lands also owned Field and Stream. That was the sister company that was next door to Dick's at 5th Street Station.
So they're not really changing anything?
They're rebranding Field and Stream to Public Lands.
Okay.
And part of the rebranding has to do with the firearms.
Yeah.
Field and Stream is distancing itself completely from firearm sales. You got a 3-shot ready to go? Let's get a 3-shot so we get the Antonio Banderas of finance, Alex Erpy in the mix. I think that is a new shirt.
It's not that new. It's just I don't often
like it.
wear it. It was nice and warm today, so I said I'll do a little short sleeve button down.
I like it. You look sharp.
Thank you.
So much I want to cover with you. First, you knew of the Rare Book School at UVA?
Yes, in fact, when I did one of my papers at UVA, I actually examined like a letter from Jorge Luis Borges. He's an Argentine writer that they have in that collection. So they have a lot. It's not only like old books, but they've got a huge Borges collection of like letters, writings. But I think they have an enormous Faulkner collection. So William Faulkner. So you've got manuscripts, but also like correspondences, little notes that they would write. They have a lot that's in that collection. So you didn't, as a student, you were allowed, like you would go down there, they put you in a special room, and you were able to look at some of these. I mean, obviously it depends on the manuscript. You can't, probably the really most expensive ones, I doubt you can like touch with your own hands, but some of them you can like just look at with your own hands and then touch this letter that someone wrote 50, 60 years ago.
That's the amazing part. And when Neil Williamson, we'll get to your comments. Nathan Miller, we'll get to your comments. Beth Dunlap Marcus, we'll get to your comments here. Bob Shada, we'll get to your comments as well. Didn't you find that fascinating about the Rare Book story from the news, the virginia.edu news website? This professor not only was transporting his rare book collection from Princeton to Charlottesville,
Which is
rare
crazy.
books, we're talking centuries old, scrolls and ink rubbings, but he was letting the students in the class pick up the books. Did you see that part of the story, Jim?
Yeah.
They were holding them, they were touching them, they were
Oh, yep.
initially, I mean, what is a 20-year-old now? Takes out his phone to try to like experience the moment with the photo for social media.
This is real
This dude is
experiencing
like,
it.
put down your damn phones and grab this and touch it and be in the moment in my class.
Oh, absolutely. And they'll probably, I would imagine with most of these, they'll probably still be able to do that. Because it's not difficult to, you make an appointment, say, I'm a student, I want to examine this primary source document, and you go into like a special climate controlled room and take a look at it. It's a very neat place.
Neil Williamson and Bob Shadow, we'll get to your comments here in about 15 seconds. What is the best collectible that you guys have in your private collections right now?
Oh, that's a good question.
Mine is it comic books? Is it baseball cards, football cards? The best collectible I probably have right now is a Brett Favre rookie card from his time with the Atlanta Falcons.
Oh, that's nice.
Brett Favre, Hall of Fame quarterback, made his name with the Green Bay Packers, Super Bowl champion. I have a rookie card in mint condition of his from the Atlanta Falcons. Judah Wickhauer, I would imagine, I've known you for about a decade, that your rare collection, your private collection, has perhaps a rare book or stamp in it, or maybe a comic book. Alex, does yours have anything of merit?
So I have ones that I'm personally attached. Probably the most valuable like collector's thing that I have is probably I have a baseball signed by Yogi Berra.
That's pretty
Yogi
legit.
Berra signed a baseball.
Was that a gift from Xavier?
I think it was, when we went out to Cooperstown. It was a gift from him.
Okay, that's legit. Judah, anything in yours?
I mean, I've got
No comic books?
some old comics that might be worth something. I've got stamps, but nothing that I like. Yeah, I think I just found someone's old stamp collection. I have no idea if any of them are worth anything.
So you have some old stamps. Let's get a
They can
value
be-
on those bad boys.
I've got some old stamps.
They could be worth something.
I've got
They could
lots
be
of
worth
old
lots.
comic books, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know how many of them are. None of them are like the first Avengers comic book
First
ever
edition.
or anything like that.
Neil Williamson watching the program right now, president of the Free Enterprise Forum. Pittsburgh-based Dick's Sporting Goods outgoing CEO and chairman of the board, Edward Stack, said recently that the company plans to open an outdoor concept called Public Lands as the company looks to exit out of the Field and Stream business and the firearm business. That's correct. Dick's stays. Public Lands replaces Field and Stream as they try to get away from firearm sales in this country.
So Field and Stream was still selling firearms, even though Ditch. I remember Ditch was in the news for saying they would no longer sell firearms,
Yeah.
but they continued to sell it just in a different store.
They had a lot of people angry at them for discontinuing their firearms.
doing that.
Field and Stream had an incredible firearm selection at Fifth Street Station.
Interesting.
Incredible. Now Public Lands comes in and they're distancing themselves from that. Dick's was not in the firearm business. It was the Field and Stream sister company that sold the
That wasn't
firearms.
okay.
Yeah, Dick's is more like the type of gear that you see in PE class, bicycles, stuff like that, where Public Lands and Field and Stream is the outdoor component of the business. Nathan Miller says his best sports collectible is a 1999 Orioles team signed ball, and he says Cal Ripken Jr. is on there.
Oh, that's pretty nice.
That's legit. Nathan, I'm writing back to you. That's legit. Bob Shadow watching the program, he also confirms what we're talking about. He says, Dick's was the same, but Public Lands took over the vendor that used to sell the guns and fishes. That's guns and fishing stuff. That's Field and Stream. He also said Dick's added a big bike repair department. No question that bike riding has caught fire during the pandemic.
Oh, that's for sure.
Yeah.
What's caught fire, at least of today, is the markets.
Oh, yep.
What is going on today, my friend?
I mean, do you always see these little bumps, especially in bear markets? Sometimes bear markets can have those really big one-day swings where a lot of negativity gets priced in. You maybe have some bad news that was unexpected, but then people look and say, okay, the market completely crashed last week. Maybe it's a good time for me to get in and buy. I wouldn't all this say, oh my goodness, we've turned the corner. But sometimes once the market has baked in a lot of bad news, there's some buying opportunities that people come in, and so the market's up about, I think last I checked, around 2.5% for the S&P 500 today.
That's where it's at. Walk me through this. Unemployment, open jobs, people can't finding work. Likely, economists say, has to increase for inflation to start getting in a check.
So I read that as well. I think it was Larry Summers.
Yeah,
who
that's what
said
it was.
that.
Larry Summers today. You buy that?
That's such an economist thing to say.
He literally
in the
said
sense
he wants 10 million people to lose their job.
Yeah,
Today, he said that.
I kind of bristle when economists say things like that, because what they're just doing is looking back and saying, yes, historically, do unemployment and inflation not correlate with each other? Yes, in other words, historically, when inflation goes up, you tend to have high inflation, low unemployment, or in recessions, you have high unemployment and inflation comes down. However, we have also seen in the past 50 years plenty of times where unemployment was high and inflation was high, stagflation, and I just don't buy this notion. He's operating under this old Phillips curve that I think, the Phillips curve was this formula that suggested that there was an inverse relationship between unemployment and inflation. In other words, when one goes up, the other goes down, and vice versa. I think it's pretty clear, a lot of statisticians have said that is dead. That has not been true for the last 20 years, this notion that the only way to have lower inflation is to have higher unemployment, and the only way to drop unemployment is to somehow push up inflation. Really has not been the case for a long time, and I don't see, that seems to me a very I give up kind of mentality, like, we're just going to have to intentionally.
Or heartless.
Well, yeah, I mean, let's intentionally cause a recession, because I can't think of any other way to deal with inflation except intentionally causing a recession. When I think when you look at where we are, again, we've poured a lot of money into the system. I'm not saying a recession is avoidable at this point. It could be that it's not, that it's on its way and there's nothing we can do about it. But the idea that we should be aiming towards 10% unemployment in 1 year, or I think you said 5% unemployment for 2 years.
I'll read it verbatim, and then Judah, you jump in here. Alex, you finish your thoughts.
Wasn't it 10, 7.5, and 6?
Yeah,
This is what he said.
Parsing it out with what we'd need.
This is from Bloomberg News, and Larry Summers is a legit dude, former U.S. Treasury Secretary.
Oh, yes.
Larry Summers says in a speech from London that there needs to be a lasting period of higher unemployment to contain inflation. Summers says at least a 1 year spike to 10%, 2 years of 7.5% unemployment, and 5 years of 6% unemployment. Put in a different way, Larry Summers is calling for the unemployed rolls to swell to roughly 16 million people from just under 6 million people in May, and he's saying that's how you get inflation in check.
It's such a cynical thought and mentality. I mean, is that really where we are sitting and saying that the best that we can do is intentionally go into recession because they can't think of any other way to deal with inflation? That's
pretty much what he's saying.
I mean, I don't know about you, I'd rather drill a bunch more oil and try to solve it that way before going into recession.
What do you make of that? What immediately comes to mind for you, J-Dubs? MJ Arquette, we'll get to your comments here in moments, MJ.
Well, the problem is I know a lot less than Alex does. And Alex, do you know anything about
Alex knows the most here on this.
Do you know anything about Triffin's dilemma?
Triffin's dilemma. That's not really about behavioral.
It has to do with our country. Well, it has to do with the U.S. dollar as the world reserve currency, and how it creates a strong dollar, but invites a lot more import than export, which is one of the reasons why we've lagged as an exporter in recent years. And then I was reading something recently, and it was tying some of that together with what's going on, and how historically they've tried to get rid of inflation, and the fact that I think there was okay. So here's another big part: is that we're in a credit cycle, a debt cycle, and the problem being that they're kind of stuck, because if they raise the rates, then obviously we start to see the stock market tank and the economy go down go down the drain. But if they keep rates artificially lowered, as they've been doing for the last
You
few
got
years,
ridiculous inflation.
what happens is it incentivizes everyone to start borrowing. Everything
course.
is credit because it's cheap. The problem is you're just building debt and debt and debt and debt and debt, and eventually it leads you have to raise the interest rate. You have to raise the rate, and that, of course, is going to lead to the stock market going
It's
down.
the stock market going
And
down.
so whatever they do,
You can't
I
win.
don't know that there is a balance that they can find in there that will actually work to resolve the issue.
And I'm not sure that there is one on the Federal Reserve side either. In other words, there are times when we saw it in 1929 when the Federal Reserve kept rates, basically allowed money to become too tight. We saw it in early 2000s when Federal Reserve kept rates too low for too long. If the Federal Reserve makes a very serious mistake, it is not easily reversible. It's not like, oh, we left rates too low for too long, let's just raise them and problem solved, right?
Yeah.
Or, oh, oops, the Federal Reserve, the federal government spent $2 trillion last year, it probably shouldn't have spent, let's just raise rates and fix it. Sometimes when you make a mistake of this magnitude, there is no easy fix.
Walk us through, in Cliff Notes, layman's terms, what Larry Summers is saying. And Nathan Miller is watching in Bridgewater, Virginia. Larry Summers, in my opinion, has historically had really bad takes. The former U.S. Treasury Secretary Larry Summers says 16 million, you want to curb inflation, 16 million Americans need to be laid off, lose their job, or get out of work.
Yeah, basically what he's saying is there used to be, as I mentioned before, there used to be a formula saying, this formula was supposedly discovered back in the 60s, that historically when inflation goes up, unemployment goes down, the unemployment rate, and when the unemployment rate goes up, inflation goes down. In other words, they move in opposite directions. So what he's basically saying is, he obviously still believes that relationship exists, and so the only way to get inflation to come down is for unemployment to go up.
When I was reading mentioned that, and they said it doesn't always hold true, especially if you look at places like Argentina,
And
which
I think
right
you could
now
argue it
has
hasn't held true in the United States since the 1970s.
interesting. Yeah.
It's once the economy is a tricky thing. The moment you discover a relationship that exists in the economy and you try to exploit it, the relationship goes away because people now see what you're doing. They see what you're trying to do and they adjust their behavior accordingly. And so it's very difficult to continue to rely on these 1960s formulas and say, oh yes, if we just magically have a bunch of people that are suddenly out of work, this will solve all our problems.
So the
Right.
American population is 332 million plus or minus people. Of that 332 million, not all of job working age. You got children and you got older folks, so they're not all of job working age.
Yeah.
So to say 16 million people need to be out of work to to put inflation in check is at bare minimum, if you just take the population as a whole and not take out the old or the young. At bare minimum, you're talking 5% of the country. More realistically, 16 million people is probably 10.
Well, like you said, it's around 10% of the labor force.
Yeah, that is an astronomical amount of people.
That is.
1 in 10 people, he's saying, need to be out of work.
I know, it's just...
That just shows it's like this thing is going to get way, way uglier.
It
Well,
shows that they don't have
An idea of how to stop this.
yeah.
An idea of how to stop this, right? Isn't that what your take is? You're the expert. I got a talk show and a microphone.
I don't think that they know at this point what to do. I think they're sitting there between, and also they're sitting there between a rock and a hard place, and because the Federal Reserve might be saying, maybe what we need to do is jack up rates to a really high level and squash this thing. but it's a decision, like because Judah said, it's a decision that they cannot take.
Yeah.
Because the number one debtor is the
It's the
United
United
States
States.
government.
Yeah.
And already around 9% of the federal budget is interest payments on U.S. debt.
Yeah.
And this is interest payments on debt that is at like 0.25% interest rates.
Yeah.
So can you imagine what happens
If the
to
rate-
interest payments as a percent of the budget if the federal government owes 10, 12% interest rates on its bonds?
Yeah.
There will be no federal budget. Basically, the entire federal budget, the entire economy will go towards paying off
Debt service.
So the Federal Reserve knows that. So they know that A, they cannot do what Paul Volcker did to crush inflation in the late 70s, early 80s. They cannot raise rates to 15% and try to squash inflation. They cannot do what was done in 1921 when there was super high inflation and the Federal Reserve said, we are just going to jack up rates and squash this thing quickly. In other words, you get a lot of pain in a short period of time. They cannot do it.
Well, can they force the job, the layoffs?
No.
Well, by doing nothing, it's going to happen organically?
That's what I'm not sure how he intends. That's another interesting thing. I read this article and I said, how does he intend to achieve it? Is he saying just sit there and watch it happen?
And let it go organically?
Or is he saying he thinks that this will be the result of jacking up interest rates? It's difficult to say how he intends to, intentionally cause 10% unemployment. I'm not sure how he came to that conclusion, or maybe he's just talking theory. He's saying
Probably.
there's going to be a recession, and the recession is the only thing that will drop inflation.
Carol Thorpe, watching the program, she has something to contribute on the collectibles in her private portfolio. She said, I have over 300 signed New York Giants autographed items.
Wow.
Perhaps my full team signed Super Bowl 21 program would be the most valuable item in my collection. That's legit,
Wow.
Carol Thorpe.
Legit. Go
Bob-
Giants. I'm a big New York Giants fan.
Bob Shada making a Seinfeld reference. Bob Shada says, Vandalay Industries is a big importer-exporter in our country. Vandalay Industries was the fake employer George Costanza worked for in Seinfeld. MJ Arquette is watching. She says, there's a girl chiming in. I have a New York Mets team signed ball, including Tug McGraw's signature, mid-late 60s. It belonged to my grandmother and received it when she passed away. One of my favorite items now in my son's room on his bookshelf.
Nice.
I love
Yeah.
that. Thank you, MJ.
Close to 69 Mets, yeah.
Can the 16 million unemployed just happen organically? The mom and pops, locally owned businesses, small businesses, Main Street businesses have cost of goods higher than ever before. Gas is affecting everything. Their debt service payments are going up because it's tied to a floating interest rate that's moving in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
They can't hire anybody. Maybe it happens organically. 16 million people.
That's what I'm wondering if he's needed. I mean, if
It might.
we hit 10% unemployment in 2008, 2009 recession,
Yeah.
so.
We've seen this before.
You were going to say something, Judah?
Yeah, I don't know. What I was reading also likened what's going on now to the Weimar Republic, and after World War I, they just started printing and printing and printing and printing and printing, and pretty soon, it just got out of hand, and they were doing the absolute wrong thing, and of course, they started having to print, higher and higher denomination bills to just, so people weren't carrying around wheelbarrows full of cash. Let's hope.
So we hope not.
Michael Guthrie says, good to see you on camera, Judah Wickower. Michael Guthrie, welcome to the broadcast. What
Michael
scares you the
Guthrie,
most about
good
all
man.
this?
My big concern is that in other words, if this inflation that we're seeing is still the result of a lot of poor decisions being made, I don't think it's a guarantee that if you go into recession, suddenly inflation vanishes. That's my only concern. My only concern is that the Federal Reserve does just enough to push us into recession and not enough to get rid of inflation. And so you have a lot of people who are out of work, and
That's stagflation.
that's stagflation. You have
And
a
we
lot of
talked
people-
about that about a month ago.
We did. That's my concern, that you do just enough to push the economy downward, but not enough to actually get rid of inflation. And so you get a lot of people who are stuck with facing both at the same time.
Oof.
That's my concern. I can't tell you whether or not it's going to happen based on what we're seeing, because there's just so many conflicting indicators right now. But that's my big concern.
Last week we chatted on the show about household balance sheets now seeing credit card debt rising, and I believe last week it's the highest it's been. Has it been in American history? Was it last week?
I don't know. I wouldn't doubt it.
Household credit card debt.
I haven't read
I
that,
would
but
hope not, because I thought it came down a lot after the
thought
last.
it was credit card debt. I'm googling it right now. American.
I know that bubble popped too in the last recession, but I would hope
Let's
that
see.
it has not surpassed that.
I'm quite, and I'll look it up. I'll look it up here. Here's the question I'm going to ask. Last week we talked about how credit card debt is rising. This week we got economists saying that 16 million people should be out of work. Gas prices have still surged on average in this country over $5 a gallon. Fortunately, when I was driving into town, I saw them dropping a little bit.
It's dropped a little bit.
It's in
Yeah.
like the
I saw some
460s,
go
I've
for
seen them.
479
Yeah,
to
I've seen them in the
460.
470s the last few
it's
days.
dropping
as
a
well.
little bit locally. Still across the country, it's surged over 5. I mean, Alex, we got households cutting back on spending, saying that they're eating out less now, and they're doing less from an entertainment standpoint because they're being cost conscious. We go into the summer months where people are traveling. I see this conflicting narrative, and the conflicting narrative is summer travel, pent-up demand, post-COVID, airlines can't hire enough people. And the conflicting narrative with that is household credit card debt rising, gasoline prices out of control, inflation is really creaming mom and dad in homes. What's accurate?
I'm going to be honest, it continues to baffle me as well, particularly some of the job situation where you sit there and saying, all right, we're supposedly on the verge of higher unemployment, yet you have so many people voluntarily foregoing job opportunities to wait for, I guess, increased pay somewhere else. Like, I don't want this job, I want more. I think as of last month, we still had more job openings than there were people unemployed. So you sit there and say, how are these jobs not being filled? How in Charlottesville are these jobs not being filled, if indeed things are so bad? So my concern, as I've stated, I think we've talked about this a little bit before, is I would hate to think that people are drawing down their savings to hold out for a higher paying job. Like, I don't want to go work for this local business. He's only for me to pay me $20 an hour. Because some of them are competitive rates. Because I want to be clear, some of the local businesses we talk to, we're not talking, oh, I'm offering $10 an hour, why won't people take my job? We're talking, I'm offering you $20, $22 an hour to be a waiter.
Yeah.
And no one wants this job. So I mean, this is not like below living wage payments, the wages that we're talking about. These are some significant wages that people can't get these positions filled. So my concern is that there's a lot, let's face it, the economy is also a lot of individual decisions combined together. My concern, as a financial advisor, I would hate to think that people are drawing down their savings and taking on debt to hold out for, I don't want to take this waiter job for $22 an hour. Let me hold out and see if I can get a different one for $24.
We literally were talking about this before the show. That phenomenon right there. This is from CNBC. The Federal Reserve's monthly credit report found that revolving credit, which mostly includes credit card balances, jumped nearly 20% in April from the previous month to over $1 trillion. This broke the pre-pandemic record of $1.1 trillion. So we're at the highest now for credit card debt for American households.
For total dollar amount.
For total dollars. Credit card balances are up year over year, reaching $841 billion in the first 3 months of 2022. He's right, they got paid down during the pandemic as people stayed at home. But now that gas and groceries, for example, are out of control, folks are back to using credit cards. And the crappy part is with rates rising, the rate on those cards jumps.
Well, and it's already absurd. In other words, credit card debt is literally the worst possible kind of debt.
Worst
we talked
debt.
about
Well,
loan
sharks.
sharks.
Yeah.
But there's good debt and bad debt. Good debt is typically debt that's either helping you build equity, mortgage debt, right, or a type
Business
of debt, business debt, a type of debt where your return that you're getting for having borrowed this money is higher than the interest rate you are paying. There is no return in the stock market of that at a reasonable risk that generate 16% annual rates. So a credit card already before the rates went up was an absurd bad debt scenario. So we always encourage people, a credit card, you need to treat your credit card like your debit card. In other words, I have this credit card for convenience. I charge something on it so I don't have to carry cash around and then immediately pay it off.
Yeah, pay it off. Pay it off. And
Pay it
get a cash rewards credit card. Sign that cash rewards up for gas. This is what I'm doing. I'm getting 3% back on my Visa cash rewards card. And then I signed up as a Tiger Fuel, the market member. So the Tiger Fuel market member gives you cash rewards just for being a Tiger Fuel member. And then I get 3% back on every pump on my Visa. Then I pay the damn thing off. I pay it off.
Exactly.
And I would encourage anybody else to do that. Nathan Miller watching exactly, he says, he's saying concern on all fronts right now in America. A recession now would be very devastating, especially to the lower middle class, many of whom still have not recovered from the 2008 recession. The middle class is being eroded in this country.
It's being hammered.
I don't think our country has recovered from the 2008 recession.
That's what he's saying.
I think our government internalized a lot of the serious problems, and basically
They smoke and mirrored the 2008 recession.
I heard it put this way: they didn't kick the can down the road; they kicked the can up the stairs. They're actively making things worse in basically every decision they've made since 2008.
You agree with that?
A lot of them have been poor, and the issue is the manufacturing that used to be where a lot of those middle class jobs, it never came back after 2008. It was already being eroded, and it never recovered. The stock market recovered because they pumped $4 trillion into the stock market, and rates were so low that companies borrowed at almost 0%, which you and I couldn't do even in 2011, borrowed at 0% and bought back their own stock. So, of course, the stock market really recovered. But I think we've talked about the gap between Wall Street and Main Street. And I think we've continued to see the fruition of that since 2008. So I don't think the middle class is in good shape. And let's also not put it like the number one hammered group in the pandemic lockdown was also the middle class, the same middle class. Because all the white collar workers I know didn't lose their jobs. They worked from home. Probably some of them I know even saved a little money. And I know some people in certain professions who made more money. Certain professions who made more money because of the pandemic than they were making even before the pandemic.
A huge portion did that.
A very large portion of white collar, upper class workers. But the middle class that would go to work and that got paid decent wages is the one that got shut down.
Yeah.
You want to add to that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we all know that the divide is growing between the haves and the have-nots.
Alex Zerpe on Tuesdays is dynamite. So how about this question from Jennifer? What's the investing strategy if you do have a lot of credit card debt, Alex, and you still want to invest into the markets? Pay off that
I'm going to pay off the credit card debt.
Yeah.
When we have people that come in to the office, we often look at mortgages, student loan rates, and credit card debt. That's probably the three most common types of debt that people who walk into Emergent Financial Services
Where's
have.
car debt stack up on that?
Auto debt, it's in there with student loans. We haven't seen too much of it lately because a lot of times people will only keep it long enough while it's in that buy at 0%
Gotcha.
financing kind of thing, and then they'll just pay it off.
5 years, no interest. Pay
Exactly.
It off in 5 years.
They really have enough to buy the car. They just chose to do it, which is not a bad.
No, that's not
a bad idea at all.
Yeah.
So, mortgage rate usually good. There's ways. It's getting tougher, but there are ways you can invest in the market and still pay off your mortgage payment. So we do encourage people, if they can afford the mortgage payment, right, to take out the mortgage and then you can invest in the market. Student loans depends on the difference between subsidized and unsubsidized. If you've got subsidized student loans, it's often low enough that you don't necessarily have to pay more than you're required. Right now the required is 0, of course, because they've frozen it, but typically speaking, you don't have to pay more than what's required because the market's generating more. Credit card debt, the answer is always that we do not think about investing in the market until you have paid off your credit card debt. Now, doesn't mean you drain, doesn't mean you go and pull out your 401k and pay a 10% penalty on it, because that's just compounding your situation, right? So not to encourage you to do that, but if you've got, let's say you've got, $20,000 in savings, and you're like, do I pay down my credit card or do I invest in the market? Pay down the credit card. The market right now is not generating returns unless you go, you'd have to go to probably private equity level risk or alternative investment level risk to get 16% annualized. And the average person with less than $1 million in investable assets should not be doing that.
Yeah.
So there is nowhere to go investment-wise. I would 100% say if you have credit card debt, you pay that down instantly. If you have student loan debt, come see us, because we'll work through subsidized, unsubsidized, and then if you have mortgage debt, in other words, you have a mortgage, and you're like, do I pay off the mortgage completely or do I invest in the market? Come see us. That's where we would probably encourage people that you can invest in the market. You can look at Series I savings bonds, which we've been doing now. So it's a type of federal bond that gives you 2 times the inflation rate. Pretty good investment for people who have cash they don't need. Yep. Taxes, you have to not need the cash for 12 months.
That's not bad.
Which is not bad. So we've encouraged people to take a look at that if you have some savings, because you could say, well, if my mortgage is 5 and 5.25, right, and right now it gets recalculated every 6 months. The May calculation is 9.6% annualized for a Series I savings bond to net the difference, which is good. That's your good debt at work. But if you've got credit card debt, that 100% pay that off first.
Alex Erpy, guys, our guest, CEO, Merchant Financial Services. One of his fans is outside the window right there, looking into the show.
Oh, look at that.
Man follows Alex Erpy around here in Charlottesville. All right, my friend, Thursday edition of Today y Mañana. You and the closer, Xavier Erpy, on the show. What do you guys got cooking?
So the one thing we like to do with Today y Mañana is we still 100% believe that small business is backbone of the economy, and if we can help small businesses to be successful, a lot of other people locally will be successful.
You guys do a good job of that.
We can't solve national problems, but we can help that local small business to be patronized by people.
I love it.
Right? So we're going to have another local small business owner. Her name is Jess Walters Safatsari, and she's from Painted Orange. So it's like Painted Orange at Hilltop. I think people come and she teaches them a little bit of painting. They get together. So it's a good little small business here that we're going to talk to her about and just learn about what she does.
Very nice. Thursday
at 10:15 a.m. right here on the I Love Seville Network.
I love it. You did a great job today.
Thank you.
Alex Erpy, guys. He's fantastic. CEO of
Love being on with both of you.
Oh, we love having you. Tuesday's legitimately one of our favorite shows that we do because of you.
Yeah, definitely.
His show is fantastic. The Erpy family has a fantastic show. Thursdays, 10:15 a.m., where they are undoubtedly champions of small business in this community. They are fantastic, and they look at life and their show through a positive lens, and you see it Thursdays at 10:15 a.m. For Alex and Judah, my name is Jerry Miller. It's the I Love Seville show, where we talk for about an hour and change each day on this program about stuff that's important to us. I mean, real talk, real life that's important to us. For Alex and Judah, Jerry Miller, we will see you tomorrow at 10:15 a.m. with the good buddy Keith Smith on Real Talk with Keith Smith. You guys have a good afternoon. Take care. Good job, Alex.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Good show. It's tough times, but important for people to know